The music was lively, the laughter infectious, and the room buzzed with energy as the party hit its peak. I stood near the bar, nursing a glass of lukewarm whiskey, feeling like an outsider in my own life. Lisa, my wife, was the center of attention, her laughter cutting through the noise like a knife. She looked radiant, dressed in a deep red gown that seemed too bold for a simple work event. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way she seemed to avoid me all night, as if my presence embarrassed her. Or maybe it was the way her hand lingered on another man's arm during a conversation that seemed far too intimate for colleagues. Whatever it was, the gnawing pit in my stomach wouldn't let me enjoy a single moment. I watched her from across the room, pretending to focus on the drink in my hand. She was laughing again, her hand brushing against his shoulder. Him, a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and confident in a way that made me feel smaller just by standing in the same room. His gaze never left her, and hers, well, hers didn't seem to find its way back to me. It happened suddenly, almost like a scene from a bad movie. The man, her coworker, her friend, whoever he was, extended his hand and pulled Lisa toward the center of the room. The band switched to a slow, romantic song, and the crowd parted as they began to dance. I froze. My mind raced, but my feet refused to move. Every pair of eyes in the room seemed to land on them, and I could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. People whispered, some even chuckled, as if they knew something I didn't. And Lisa? She didn't look back at me once. For a moment, I thought I might be overreacting. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe I was just being insecure. But then I saw it. The way his hand slid to the small of her back, the way her head tilted back in laughter at something he whispered. It wasn't just a dance. It was a statement, a slap in the face in front of everyone. I don't remember deciding to speak. The words just erupted from me like a volcano I couldn't control. Lisa, I called out, my voice cutting through the music and murmurs. The room fell silent almost instantly, the band awkwardly halting mid-note. Every face turned to me, including hers. Do you think it's appropriate to let another man touch you like that when your husband is standing right here? The color drained from her face, and for the first time that night, she looked at me. But it wasn't an apologetic look. It was anger. No, it was rage. As if I was the one humiliating her, as if I was the villain in this situation. Clarence, she said, her voice sharp and clipped, you're making a scene. A scene? I laughed bitterly. The only scene here is you and him. I pointed to her dance partner, who had the audacity to smirk. Care to explain why you're acting like this is some romantic getaway instead of a professional event? The crowd whispered again, some clearly enjoying the drama while others awkwardly looked away. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the man beside her stepped forward. She's just having fun, he said, his tone dripping with smugness. Maybe you should loosen up a bit. That was the moment something inside me snapped. My whole life, I'd been the quiet, unassuming guy who avoided conflict. But this was too much. Fun, I repeated, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Is that what you call dancing with a married woman in front of her husband? Fun. The man shrugged, clearly unbothered by my words. Lisa, however, looked furious. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin as she whispered harshly, "Stop it, Clarence. You're embarrassing me." But it was too late. The party had stopped, and all eyes were on us. I could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about a dance. This was about everything. The months of coldness, the late nights at work, the excuses that never quite added up. I stared at Lisa, my voice calm but firm as I said, "Embarrassing you? Lisa, you did that all by yourself?" Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought I saw something other than anger. Guilt, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of a silent room. As the whispers started up again, I realized this was only the beginning. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than I had imagined, and I wasn't sure I was ready to find out the truth. But one thing was certain. My life would never be the same after that night. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the whispers and muffled giggles of the guests who hadn't looked away. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding like a drum that wouldn't stop. Lisa's figure disappeared through the large double doors at the far end of the room, leaving me behind to absorb the humiliation. I could feel their eyes on me. Some pitied me. Others looked amused. I was the joke of the night, the poor guy who had just been publicly disrespected by his wife. It felt like every ounce of dignity I had left was ripped from me and scattered across that polished dance floor. The man she had danced with, let's call him Mr. Smug, stood there, looking as though he had just won some sort of twisted competition. He raised his glass in mock sympathy, giving me a small nod before turning back to a group of guests who welcomed him like he was some kind of hero. I had to get out of there. My hands were shaking, and the walls of the room felt like they were closing in. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to lash out at everyone who had stood by and done nothing while my wife openly mocked our marriage. But instead, I walked to the bar and downed the rest of my whiskey in one gulp, the burn doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. Rough night, huh? The bartender, a man in his 50s with kind eyes, offered me a sympathetic smile as he poured me another drink. You could say that, I muttered, my voice barely audible. I didn't even know why I bothered to respond. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound even more pathetic than I already looked? I took the glass and moved to a quieter corner of the room. The guests had started to disperse, the music picking up again as the band tried to salvage what was left of the night. But for me, the damage was already done. My marriage, or what was left of it, had just been laid bare for everyone to see. As I stood there, staring blankly at the amber liquid in my glass, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. The way her laughter had filled the room, the way her hand had rested on his shoulder, the way she had looked at me, not with love, not with regret, but with contempt. How had it come to this? We had been happy once, hadn't we? I thought back to the early years of our marriage, to the days when Lisa's smile had been meant for me and me alone. I had built my world around her, sacrificing my own dreams to support hers. And now, it felt like she had taken that world and smashed it to pieces without a second thought. I didn't know how long I stood there, lost in my thoughts. Time seemed to blur, and the room became a haze of noise and movement that I couldn't focus on. It wasn't until I felt a hand on my shoulder that I snapped out of it. "Clarence," a voice said, soft and hesitant. I turned to see Margaret, one of Lisa's co-workers. She looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the room as if she didn't want anyone to see her talking to me. "Margaret," I said, my voice flat. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, but the look on her face told me this wasn't a social call. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For what happened. You didn't deserve that." I frowned, my curiosity piqued despite myself. "What do you mean?" Margaret hesitated, biting her lip as she glanced over her shoulder. "Look, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but you're a good guy, Clarence. You don't deserve what she's been doing." "What she's been doing?" I repeated, my heart sinking. "Margaret, if you know something, just tell me." She hesitated again, as if weighing the consequences of speaking up. Finally, she leaned in closer and whispered, "It's not the first time. That guy she danced with tonight? His name is Eric. He's been around for a while." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Around for a while?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "What does that mean?" Margaret's eyes were filled with pity as she said, "I think you know what it means, Clarence. I'm sorry. I really am." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing there with my world crumbling around me. Eric. The name felt like poison in my mind. I stared across the room, where he was now laughing with a group of people, completely unbothered by the chaos he had caused. My hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, I considered confronting him right then and there. But what would that accomplish? He wasn't the one I needed answers from. No, I needed to talk to Lisa. I needed to hear the truth from her, no matter how painful it might be. I set down my glass and headed for the exit, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Margaret's words echoed in my ears, each one cutting deeper than the last. If this wasn't the first time, then how many times had it happened? How long had she been lying to me, betraying me, making me look like a fool? And most importantly, why? Why would she do this to me after everything we had been through? The drive home was a blur. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. The house was dark, and Lisa's car was parked neatly in its usual spot. She was inside, waiting, and I was about to demand answers that I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The house loomed before me, dark and silent, as if it, too, were holding its breath. My heart raced, my palms slick with sweat as I fumbled with my keys. I felt a wave of nausea rising, but I forced it down. There was no turning back now. I stepped inside, the faint creak of the door announcing my arrival. The house was still, but not empty. I could sense her presence. I flicked on the hallway light, the brightness almost blinding after the dimness of the car. My eyes darted around, searching for her. Lisa? My voice echoed through the quiet house, trembling more than I'd like to admit. No answer. I walked into the living room. The faint scent of her perfume hung in the air, but the room was empty. Her purse sat on the coffee table, a careless afterthought, and her heels lay discarded near the couch. She was here. Lisa, I called again, louder this time, my voice cutting through the silence. Finally, I heard movement upstairs, a creak of the floorboards, a door softly closing. I took a deep breath and headed up, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the bedroom, I found her sitting at the vanity, wiping off her makeup. She didn't even look at me when I entered. "You're home late," she said, her tone casual, almost bored, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Her reflection in the mirror was calm, composed, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stood there for a moment, stunned by her indifference. "Late?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's all you have to say?" She finally turned to face me, her expression hardening. "What do you want me to say, Clarence? You made a scene. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "I embarrassed you?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Lisa, you were dancing with another man, practically draped all over him, right in front of me. And you think I'm the one who embarrassed you?" She rolled her eyes and turned back to the mirror. "It was just a dance. You're overreacting." Overreacting? I could feel the anger bubbling up, threatening to spill over. "Don't lie to me, Lisa. I talked to Margaret." That got her attention. Her hand froze mid-motion, the makeup wipe hovering near her cheek. Slowly, she turned to face me again, her eyes narrowing. "What did Margaret say?" "She told me about Eric," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "She told me this isn't the first time. So don't you dare sit there and pretend like I'm crazy." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, to my utter disbelief, she laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "Margaret needs to mind her own business," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Don't do that, Lisa," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't lie to me. Just tell me the truth." Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of annoyance. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "You want the truth, Clarence? Here it is. Yes, Eric and I are close. We've been close for a while. But it's not what you think." "Not what I think," I repeated, my voice rising again. "You were dancing with him like you were the only two people in the room. You think I don't know what that means? You think I'm stupid?" "Don't raise your voice at me," she snapped, standing up and stepping closer. "You don't get to play the victim here, Clarence. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is being married to you? You're so pathetic." Her words hit me like a slap across the face. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. "Pathetic?" I whispered. "That's what you think of me?" She shrugged, her expression cold and unfeeling. "You're weak, Clarence. Always have been. You cling to me like a lifeline, but you never once stop to think about what I want, what I need. Eric, he understands me. He makes me feel alive in a way you never could." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I had loved, The woman I had built my life around was standing here telling me that I wasn't enough for her, that I had never been enough. And what about our vows? I asked, my voice trembling. What about for better or worse? Does that mean nothing to you? She rolled her eyes again. Spare me the melodrama, Clarence. This isn't about vows or promises. This is about reality. And the reality is, I deserve better than this. Better than you. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My legs gave way, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been seeing him? There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she sighed and said, a few months. A few months. The words echoed in my mind, each syllable like a dagger to my heart. I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face. Why? I asked. Why would you do this to me? Her expression softened slightly, but there was no regret in her eyes. Because I needed more, Clarence. More than you could ever give me. I stared at her, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved turned into this cold, unrecognizable stranger? And what was I supposed to do now? For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly lost. I sat there on the edge of the bed, Lisa's words echoing in my ears like the aftermath of an explosion. I needed more. That's all she could offer to justify months of betrayal. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. It was like my body refused to process what was happening. Lisa, meanwhile, stood across from me, arms crossed, her face a mixture of irritation and defiance. She seemed almost bored, as if this conversation wasn't the unraveling of everything we had built together, but just another minor inconvenience. What do you want me to say, Clarence? She asked, her tone exasperated. You want me to grovel? To beg for forgiveness? I'm not going to do that. I'm just being honest. Honest? I finally managed to say, my voice shaking. Honest would have been telling me about Eric before you humiliated me in front of everyone tonight. Honest would have been ending things with me before you started whatever this is with him. Her lips tightened, and she looked away, avoiding my gaze. I didn't want to hurt you, she muttered, as if that was some kind of excuse. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, incredulous. Lisa, you've been lying to me for months. Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything. How do you even begin to come back from this? She sighed, as though my devastation was nothing more than a tiresome inconvenience. Clarence, don't be so dramatic. People go through this all the time. Marriages have their ups and downs. Your acting like this is the end of the world. I stared at her, stunned by her sheer indifference. This isn't a down, Lisa. This is betrayal. This is you choosing someone else over me, over us. Maybe I wouldn't have had to choose someone else if you'd been the husband I needed, she snapped, her voice rising. Do you even hear yourself, Clarence? You've been so busy wallowing in your insecurities, you didn't even notice I was unhappy. Do you even know what I want? What makes me happy? No, you don't. You've been so focused on being a victim that you didn't see this coming. Her words hit me like a slap across the face. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You're blaming me for your affair? I'm not blaming anyone, she said, her tone icy. I'm just saying that this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. You just didn't want to see it. I felt something inside me crack, some fragile part of me that had been holding on, hoping that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. But there it was, laid bare in front of me. She wasn't sorry. She didn't care. So what now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Are you leaving me for him? She hesitated, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I don't know, she admitted. Eric and we haven't really talked about the future, but I think I need some space to figure things out. Space? I repeated, shaking my head. You've already checked out, Lisa. You made your choice the moment you started lying to me. She didn't respond, and the silence that filled the room was suffocating. Finally, she turned away, walking toward the closet. I'll stay in the guest room tonight, she said over her shoulder. We can talk more in the morning. I didn't stop her. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where she had stood. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life around, was gone. Or maybe she had never really been there at all. The house was eerily quiet that night, the kind of silence that makes you feel like even the walls are judging you. Lisa had taken her pillow and a blanket to the guest room without so much as a glance back. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of how everything had spiraled so quickly. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, Eric. His smug face, his hand on her back, her laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. And yet, beneath the anger, there was something even worse. The ache of betrayal. The realization that the person I had trusted most in the world had been lying to me for months. By the time dawn broke, I had made a decision. I couldn't just sit here and let her manipulate me into thinking this was somehow my fault. I needed answers. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal, no matter how much it hurt. I waited until I heard movement downstairs. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, and I knew she was in the kitchen. Taking a deep breath, I got up and followed the scent, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen. Lisa was standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. "Morning," she said casually, like we were just two people going about a normal day. "Morning," I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "Lisa, are you serious right now? After everything that happened last night, you're just making coffee?" She set her phone down and crossed her arms. "What do you want me to do, Clarence? Cry and beg for forgiveness? You've made it pretty clear that nothing I say will make a difference." "Because you don't mean it," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't even feel bad about what you've done, do you? You're not sorry for cheating. You're sorry you got caught." She rolled her eyes, and the sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. "I already told you," she said, her tone exasperated. "Things haven't been working between us for a long time. Maybe if you'd been paying attention, you would have seen that." "Stop blaming me," I shouted, slamming my hand down on the counter. She flinched, but I didn't care. "I gave you everything, Lisa. Everything. And you threw it all away for what? A fling with some guy who probably doesn't even care about you?" Her face hardened, and she glared at me. "You don't know anything about Eric," she said coldly. "He treats me the way I deserve to be treated. He listens to me, respects me. Things you stopped doing a long time ago." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. "Respects you?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Lisa, he danced with you in front of your husband like you were some trophy he'd just won. That's not respect. That's humiliation." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No, you know what? Don't bother. I've heard enough of your excuses. You've made it clear how little you think of me, of our marriage. So here's what's going to happen." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in her expression. "What are you talking about?" she asked warily. "I'm not going to sit here and let you string me along while you figure things out," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "If you want Eric, fine. Go be with him. But don't expect me to just wait around while you decide whether or not I'm worth your time." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. "Clarence, don't be ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" I cut her off. "You humiliated me, lied to me, betrayed me, and you have the nerve to call me ridiculous? No, Lisa, I'm done." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, her protests following me down the hall. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I grabbed my coat and my keys, slamming the door behind me as I left the house. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. As I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and oddly enough, a sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Lisa wasn't the kind of person to let things go without a fight, and I had no doubt she would do everything in her power to twist this situation to her advantage. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: The woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone I'd barely recognized. And now, I had to figure out what to do next. The morning air was crisp as I drove through town, aimlessly winding through streets I barely recognized. My thoughts were tangled, my emotions a storm I couldn't calm. How had things gone so wrong? Lisa's coldness, her indifference. It was like she wasn't even the woman I married. I parked near a small coffee shop, the kind I used to visit before life got so complicated. Sitting in the car, I stared at my phone. Part of me wanted to call someone, anyone, to make sense of the chaos. But who would I call? My closest friends had drifted away over the years, partly because I had spent so much time trying to please Lisa. Just as I was about to step out and get some air, my phone buzzed. A call. I didn't recognize the number, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Clarence," a man's voice replied. It took me a moment to place it, but when I did, my stomach dropped. It was Eric. "What the hell do you want?" I snapped, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I thought we should talk," he said, his tone calm and smug. "Man to man." My anger flared instantly. "Man to man? You think what you've done makes you a man? Dancing with another man's wife, sneaking around behind my back. What part of that is manly to you?" "Look, Clarence," he said, unfazed by my outburst. "Lisa told me things were rough between you two. She's not happy. I don't think you should blame her for looking for happiness elsewhere." His words hit me like a slap. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "You think you're the solution to her problems? You think ruining someone else's marriage makes you a hero?" "I'm not trying to ruin anything," he replied, his tone dripping with fake sincerity. "I'm just saying that maybe you should think about why she came to me in the first place. Maybe if you'd been a better husband." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You don't know the first thing about our marriage. And Lisa? She's not some victim in this. She made her choices, just like you did." There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought he might actually back down. But then he said, "I just wanted to give you a heads up, Clarence. Lisa's not coming back to you. She deserves better, and she knows it. Maybe it's time you accepted that." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, a fresh wave of anger and disbelief washing over me. The audacity of that man, calling me like he was doing me a favor. But as furious as I was at Eric, his words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. What if he was right? What if Lisa really wasn't coming back? What if this was the end of everything I had worked so hard to build? I sat there in the car, the world moving on around me, while I felt like my life had come to a screeching halt. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The silence after the call from Eric was almost suffocating. I stared at my phone, my mind racing with anger, confusion, and the painful echo of his words. "Lisa's not coming back to you." Was that her plan all along? To humiliate me, break me, and leave me hanging while she walked away with no consequences? I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I needed answers. I needed to know how far this betrayal went. With a shaky breath, I started the car and drove back home. If Lisa thought she could avoid this conversation forever, she was wrong. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. I found Lisa in the living room, sitting on the couch with her laptop, scrolling like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up when I entered, her expression blank. "You're back," she said flatly, closing the laptop. "Are we going to do this again?" "Yes, we are," I said, my voice firm. "You might think you can brush this under the rug, Lisa, but I'm not letting you get away with it. I just got off the phone with Eric." Her eyes widened, just for a second, before narrowing in suspicion. "Eric called you?" "Yes, he did. And let me tell you, Lisa, the smug way he talked to me tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man you chose over me." She crossed her arms, leaning back on the couch. "So, what now, Clarence? Are you going to yell some more? Blame me for everything wrong in your life? I'm so tired of this." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "No, Lisa, I'm not going to yell. I just want the truth. All of it. How long has this been going on? How many times have you lied to me? How many nights have you been with him while I sat here like a fool, thinking you were at work?" She rolled her eyes, but I saw her fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "It doesn't matter, Clarence. It's done. What's the point of rehashing everything?" "It matters to me," I said, stepping closer. "It matters because I deserve to know the truth. Or is that too much to ask from the woman I've spent the last 7 years of my life with?" For a moment, she said nothing. Her jaw tightened, and her eyes darted to the side like she was trying to come up with a response. Finally, she sighed and looked back at me. "Fine. You want the truth?" Eric and I started seeing each other about 6 months ago. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, but things changed. Changed? I repeated, my stomach twisting. "What does that even mean, Lisa? Were you planning to leave me for him?" She hesitated, and the silence was deafening. Then, in a small voice, she said, "I don't know. Maybe." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Maybe. She didn't even have the decency to be certain about her betrayal. I felt the anger rising again, but I forced it down. I wasn't going to let her see how much this hurt me. "You don't know," I said bitterly. "After everything we've been through, you don't even know if you want to throw it all away for some guy who probably doesn't care about you half as much as I do." "Don't make this about how much you love me, Clarence," she snapped, her voice rising. "Love isn't enough. It hasn't been enough for a long time. You can't just throw 'I love you' at every problem and expect it to fix everything." "I'm not trying to fix anything anymore, Lisa," I said quietly. "I just want to understand how the woman I married turned into this." She flinched at my words but didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Finally, I turned and headed for the stairs. "Where are you going?" she called after me, her voice sharp. "To pack a bag," I said without looking back. "I can't stay here tonight." For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face, something that looked almost like fear. But she didn't stop me. She just sat there, watching as I walked away. As I packed my things, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and something else. Something like relief. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for now, I needed space. Space to think, to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. When I left the house, the weight of her gaze followed me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not yet. I shut the car door behind me, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to steady my breathing. My hands trembled, my body running on the fumes of adrenaline and heartbreak. I had just walked out of my own house, our house. Lisa didn't chase after me. She didn't beg me to stay. Maybe that was the clearest answer I was ever going to get. I drove without a destination in mind, letting the empty streets guide me. The radio played some soft, forgettable tune, but all I could hear was Lisa's voice, cold and detached. "Maybe I was going to leave you." That single word, maybe, was what hurt the most. Eventually, I pulled into a dimly lit motel parking lot. It was the kind of place you went when you had nowhere else to be. The clerk barely looked at me as I paid for a room, handing me a key without a word. The room was small, depressing, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here for comfort. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the scuffed carpet. I should have been devastated. Maybe I was. But mixed with the pain, there was something else. Something that felt like clarity. Lisa had already chosen. She just didn't have the decency to admit it. And now, for the first time in years, I had to make a choice for myself. I wasn't going to fight for someone who had stopped fighting for me a long time ago. This wasn't the ending I wanted. But maybe, just maybe, it was the one I needed. Morning light filtered through the thin motel curtains, casting a dull glow over the worn-out furniture. I sat on the bed, staring at my packed bag, realizing something for the first time. I was free. The weight that had been crushing me for months was suddenly lifting. Lisa's betrayal had broken me, but it had also given me something I hadn't had in a long time: clarity. I had spent so many years trying to make her happy, bending over backward to be the husband she wanted, all while she treated me like an afterthought. But now, I didn't have to beg for her love. I didn't have to prove my worth to someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. I was enough. She just wasn't the person meant to see it. With a deep breath, I grabbed my bag and walked out of the motel. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but for the first time in years, I was making a choice for me. As I stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit my skin, filling my lungs with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. The world wasn't ending. It was just beginning again, in a different way. Lisa was my past. My future? That was still unwritten. But one thing was certain. I was done chasing people who didn't value me. I was done settling for less than I deserved. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. I didn't know where I was going next, but I knew one thing. Wherever it was, it would be on my terms. And that was enough.